I think that there are 4 like levels of experience roughly. There may be some overlap between them, but I think I can roughly like separate things out into 4 different levels, right? And these levels are kind of the degree of primacy or the degree of significance that the experience has to us subjectively, or let's say the amount of, or how close the information or the event is to your like first-hand experience. So I use an example of New York City, right? If you go to New York City and you walk the streets and you have the full sensory experience of what it's like, you hear the noise of the cars and the people walking on the street, you smell the sort of, I don't know, the food smell coming out of a restaurant, but you also smell maybe the sewer drain next to you, or you see the large skyscrapers and you sense everything around it, right? You are there firsthand experiencing New York City. You have a firsthand experience of it. And then you can go to the next layer, the layer, let's say, further away from you, and have a secondhand experience of New York City. This might be your best friend or your sibling or something goes there, right? And they tell you what it was like in quite good detail. They tell you about how it smelled, how it felt, what they saw, what they heard. They use great words. They go into great detail in their story, and you kind of get a sense of what it might be like based on experiences you've had that are similar from what they're describing, but it's not as close. It's not as significant as if you had been there yourself and experienced that level. The third level is like a, I don't know, like distant experience. Let's call it that, something like that, where I can Google right now pictures of New York City, right? And I can see what some buildings look like. I can see what the taxis look like there. I can see a couple of restaurants there and what's on the menu at those restaurants. But I'm not there myself, and I'm not getting a sort of secondhand telling of the experience by somebody I know. It's not very descriptive. It's not very rich in information, let's say. And so it's kind of, I have an awareness that there is New York City, a place in America that's quite far from me, that there's a lot of business going on there, and there's a lot of corruption, let's say, and there's a lot of wealth and some inequality and whatever. I've never been there, I don't know, but I have an awareness that it's there, similar to the way that you feel about Africa in conversations we've had previously, right? That for you, Africa is on that distant experience level. Then the final level is the non-experience level, where you have no idea that you can even experience that thing. This is where what you don't know resides, right? Which is an area of like knowledge that we don't seem to even think about because we have no conception of it. I don't know what I don't know, right? And this is like if you went to an uncontactable tribe, indigenous tribe that sort of don't have technology and still live like our ancestors from long ago, they don't even have a concept of New York City. And this is where Berkeley's idea of the tree falling and nobody seeing it and being aware of it is. It's in the the non-experienced level, right? It still exists. The tree still fell, but you didn't know that the tree fell, right? But it still happened. And to sort of finish it, I'll go back to actually say like what does this actually mean, right? What's the practical application of this theory? Why does it matter, Joel? Why should we care that there are different levels of experience? Well, number one, we have to recognize which level of experience some information or some event or some concept is for us, right? So, for example, if you think you know about love from watching, I don't know, some romantic film or reading a book or hearing about your best friend's relationship or what you think you've read about love through poetry or books or whatever, right? You still don't know what it's truly like until you experience it firsthand. It might be very, very detailed from that secondhand perspective, but it's still in the secondhand level of experience. And so you want to bring it into the firsthand at some point in your life to really understand it and know what it's about. And secondly, we must recognize when we are reluctant to bring information from a sort of more distant level of experience to the first, okay? And this is where your speeding ticket analogy comes in. If you get a speeding ticket letter through the mail, you know it looks angry and you know there's a fine in there, and you neglect it, you're leaving it in the distant experience or like the secondhand experience level when you're not opening it and really confronting it. And then expanding out from things like speeding tickets, like mundane things like that, I think about it in terms of like problems in our relationships or in our life. Sometimes we kind of push things to the side and leave them in a more distant or more secondhand level of experience and don't bring them close into significance and into primacy to really confront them. That can be something like a relationship doesn't quite feel as right as it did. A friendship seems to have shifted a little bit, but no one sort of acknowledges it. Or you've noticed that your personal conduct in life has sort of it's kind of decreased a little bit in quality. You've maybe took your foot off the gas slightly, but you don't want to really think about that. There's just a sort of voice in your head that's keeping that away from being right in front of you and focusing on it. And sometimes that can be dangerous, as what you neglect to experience firsthand doesn't go away. Like, it exists. It's just you're less willing to really subjectively experience it. Does that make sense? I've used that word a lot, but this is a difficult thing to try and get across. And I'll finish with a quote that it reminds me of, which is one of Jung's, where he said, "That which you most want to find is where you least want to look." And putting it in the terms I've just laid out with this levels framework, I think the experience you most need to have in its full primacy and significance has been unconsciously neglected to an inferior level, and thus must be consciously dug up and addressed to organize your psyche appropriately and move your life forward. That's a lot of words, but basically, if there's something you need to confront in your life, and you're pushing it away, even though you know it exists, you're just pushing it away to a more distant level of experience, you need to bring it forth and address it. Now, that was quite complicated. So if you have any questions, go, because I'm still getting my head around this myself.
Yeah, firstly, with the Jung point, so basically, where you want to look is actually to go to New York itself. You don't want to just read about it. That is where you least want to go, because it's easier to just kind of read about it. And when we say things like New York, this is just like a metaphor, like New York. It's going to a personal kind of state, being the person that you kind of want to be. We can kind of play with this. And so I think Schopenhauer summarized it perfectly in one quote of, "He who gets his wisdom and knowledge only through books is like those who read about is like those who learn about a place only through travel descriptions." So we know this is to be true, that it's always going to be better in person. And it kind of reminds me of they say at work, like, okay, so the most significant is going to be the most significant form of communication is going to be face to face, then it's going to be on the phone, and then it's going to be on text, and those things can be misinterpreted. It's also made me think of the compression culture idea that we spoke about a couple episodes ago, of we're not willing to go to New York. We just want to see a 30-second TikTok about New York, and we think we know all about it. And we can kind of characterize what we think about it. And when we're talking about it to someone else, we're like very misinformed and very ignorant. So my practical implication is actually taking away from this the levels to experience to the levels of truth and of goodness. And I got this started from Peterson, basically in a theological context, saying that God is something that's either top down or bottom up, and that's he referenced it very always through his Jubilee debates, and that basically means, well, do things do good or do truths? Well, do things stem from truths? Or do they all come from a single master truth? And you can replace truth with good or with experience or any of these words. What comes from what, essentially? And it's a very, very profound question. People take their whole lives to answer that question. But what I read about it from Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, and he kind of explored this with, like, if things were to stem from truths, what would that mean? And it would mean that if you kind of think about the way that we live and how we believe in really rigid scientific truths, and then we make assumptions based off that, and how with this idea, every little small thing we do does matter in a way. If we're taking this notion, because then that's how things build up. It's how the butterfly effects, one thing, habit will lead to another. And you've got that. And then you've also got the top-down approach, which was Plato's idea of basically, like, I've got a washing machine tablet here, and somewhere in the universe there is the perfect washing machine tablet. maybe it turns my clothes into gold. It makes it smell like I'm in a field full of roses. There somewhere exists a perfect washing machine tablet, and that is the ultimate good. And this one right here is just a percentage of that ultimate good. So that's the theory of the forms. And then there's kind of a third category of things are kind of good, but in their own kind of individual ways. And that's like how sight is the function of our eyes, but hearing definitely doesn't mean that hearing isn't as significant because that's got its own kind of function. It doesn't mean that hearing's bad at sight. It just means that hearing has got its own function. If that makes sense. So Aristotle basically played with all three of these ideas, and he was very skeptical, and he didn't actually come to an answer. It's a very, very difficult question. And I mean, myself, I played with this philosophy and I tried to flip it. And I said, well, what about do things come from one master bad, or do you do a bad action and then bad things manifest from it? So is it the action of punching an old woman that's the bad, or is it that this is an evil world and we humans are capable of evil and we're capable of jealousy, and that was just a percentage of this total, well, the devil. And so I agree with Aristotle in that it's very context dependent, and it's a combination of all three essentially. I know this wasn't really this kind of wasn't your point, steered away from your point a bit, but something I read recently that is somewhat along the same lines.